It was a quiet January night in 2025 in the small suburb of Baldwinsville, New York. Angela Murray, a retired police officer, had come home after a long day and was winding down for the evening. The apartment was cozy and calm, just Angela and her loyal pit bull mix, Rocco. Normally, Rocco was a gentle, quiet dog who rarely made a sound. The hush of a cold winter night had settled over Baldwinsville, and the small house was warm and quiet. For a retired officer like Angela, evenings tended to be peaceful. She had made a simple dinner and was sipping herbal tea as Rocco curled at her feet. On this night, however, something was very different. Angela sat in her living room, reading a book by the soft glow of a lamp, with Rocco curled up at her feet. They felt safe and at ease in their familiar world. But tonight, Rocco seemed restless beneath her. He shifted his weight and let out a low whine, eyes darting toward the hallway. Angela felt a prickle of unease, though she couldn't yet name why. Suddenly, in the stillness of the apartment, Rocco's deep bark erupted into the quiet. Angela looked up, startled. Rocco was at the doorway of the bedroom now, his entire body tense. He barked again, louder and more urgent this time. It was the kind of barking Angela had never heard from him before. Frantic and insistent, as if he was trying to say something important. Alarmed, Angela stood up. She could barely hear the faint wail of the smoke detector in the distance over Rocco's barking. A faint, acrid scent tinged the air, and she even tasted smoke on her tongue. Alarm bells rang in her mind. The realization hit. Something was terribly wrong. Angela's heart pounded as a wave of fear washed over her. In the next instant, she tossed aside the book and sprang into action. Panicked but acting quickly, Angela threw aside the book and made for the bedroom door. Rocco's barking grew even more urgent. In one swift motion, Angela grabbed her phone and hurried shoes, then scooped Rocco into her arms. He yelped once as she lifted him up, his body rigid with tension. Rocco's warm, trembling frame pressed against her, and she could feel his rapid heartbeat against her chest. They had no time for hesitation. Angela flipped on the light and sprinted toward the front hall. The smoke was thicker now, a heavy fog that clung to the low ceiling. Every breath Angela took burned in her lungs. She instinctively clamped her hand over her mouth and nose to filter the smoke, but the effort only helped slightly. Her eyes burned and watered as she blinked violently. The alarm was shrieking in her ears. She could feel the heat behind her as she dashed down the narrow hallway. Doors along the hall warped from the heat. The wood floor under her feet was already growing hot. Rocco, tucked tightly against her chest, continued to struggle upwards, but she held him firmly. "We gotta get out," Angela said, her voice shaking. The front door was dangerously close now. Angela's foot caught on the edge of a rug as she ran. She stumbled but kept her balance. There was a burning smell in the air, thick and acrid. In the corner of her eye, she saw bright orange flames licking along the edges of the living room carpet, creeping closer to her path. Without thinking, Angela gathered all her strength and pushed open the front door. She sprinted down the steps, just as the stairway behind her burst into flame. The roar of the fire grew deafening within seconds. They burst out into the cold night air, the contrast shocking. Stars were visible through the rising smoke that poured from their building. Angela dropped Rocco safely on the sidewalk. As they stepped outside, a rush of bitter cold air hit them, and Angela gasped as the icy chill stung her lungs. He shook himself, as if waking from a nightmare, and then looked up at her with eyes full of concern. Angela wrapped her arms around him and inhaled his familiar scent. He was safe and unharmed. Rocco's tail thumped weakly, overwhelmed by the moment. Shaking, she turned to look back. The flames had engulfed the stairwell they had just used, and within moments, the roof began to collapse in a cascade of sparks. Neighbors hurried out of their own apartments. The street quickly filled with frightened residents and the roar of approaching fire engines. Someone shouted encouragement to Angela as she knelt by Rocco on the sidewalk. "You saved her," a neighbor called to Rocco, who wagged his tail slowly, still catching his breath. Angela's legs felt weak as she sank to the ground, still clutching Rocco. Her hands trembled as she stroked his fur. It was then, between sobs of relief, that she gasped out, "He did it! He's my good boy!" as she stroked Rocco's head through the haze of smoke. "He watches out for me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, the panic and confusion melted into gratitude. Someone handed Angela a warm wool blanket. Her teeth chattered as she wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, but she held Rocco even closer, trying to steady his trembling body. The firefighters arrived and immediately charged into the building with hoses and axes. Angela stood aside in her slippers, still clutching Rocco tightly to her chest. The air was filled with sirens, shouts, and the thunderous crackling of burning wood. Other residents huddled together with blankets, also clutching small pets and precious keepsakes from their escape. Someone gave her a cup of tea from a red plastic thermos. All that Angela could do was sip it in tiny gulps while never letting Rocco out of her sight. News crews gathered at a distance, lights flashing, cameras capturing the scene. But Angela barely noticed. All that mattered in the chaos was that she and Rocco were alive. Later that night, after the fire was mostly under control, Angela sat wrapped in a donated coat, drinking warm tea at an emergency shelter set up in a local church hall. Rocco was curled up beside her on a folding chair, panting softly, but calm now. Flashing lights illuminated the shattered windows of what remained of her apartment building. All around her, neighbors whispered about the miracle they had just witnessed. One woman recalled how Rocco had started barking the moment smoke first appeared, giving Angela her only warning. Another neighbor kept nodding in awe, still calling the dog a hero. Angela managed a small, tired smile, even though her limbs still trembled from the night's terror. She gently stroked Rocco's head and thought to herself, "If he hadn't raised the alarm, I wouldn't be here. He saved us." She thanked him silently, grateful for this miracle. Angela also knew they had lost everything. The house she had lived in for so many years was burned hollow. In the emergency shelter, it suddenly felt surreal to be sleeping on a cot with all their belongings gone. She glanced at Rocco, his large head resting in her lap, and felt a fresh wave of emotion. Out in the cold, Rocco had done what so many alarms and safety devices had failed to do. He had jumped into action without hesitation, dragging her through flames to safety. His loyalty had turned into real-life heroism. The memory of running past exploding windows and the heat of the staircase burning behind them felt like a terrible dream. Everything from the TV to the pictures on her wall was now ash or rubble. Angela took a shaky breath and squeezed Rocco's paws with relief. Despite the fear and loss, one thought helped Angela steady herself. She still had Rocco. In the grand scheme, she realized that all the things in the apartment were replaceable. Irreplaceable was the loving dog who would never abandon her. In the days that followed, the community showed up with support. Neighbors delivered blankets and food to the makeshift shelter, and they spoke of Rocco with admiration. A local family donated dog food and treats, and another brought a new plush bed for Rocco to sleep in. Angela and Rocco rode together in the back of a pickup truck to sift through what remained of their home. Though only ashes and rubble were left, the simple comfort of Rocco's presence at her side brought her unexpected strength. Each night, as the ordeal faded into memory, Angela found herself at her friend's house where she was staying. Rocco curled against her under a warm quilt. Sometimes she woke in the early hours, feeling only the gentle rise and fall of his snoring as he dreamed. His steady warmth reminded her of safety. She would often whisper, "Thank you, boy," into the darkness, knowing he didn't understand her words, but sensing the gratitude in her voice. Eventually, when her mind was a little clearer, Angela set her sights on the future. She applied for a new apartment, one with smoke detectors in every room. On moving day, she placed Rocco's new bed in a corner and moved his favorite toy nearby. Every morning when the sun woke her, she saw Rocco's smiling face and remembered how precious life was. Months later, as the building was finally cleared of rubble, Angela and Rocco were beginning to rebuild more than just their home. They were rebuilding their sense of security. The community had set up a fund in their name, and many neighbors and strangers sent letters and cards offering help. But none of that mattered to Angela as much as Rocco's wagging tail each morning. Each tail wag was a reminder of how lucky she was to have him. With each step outside, he walked proudly by her side, his head held high. Whenever someone inquired about what had happened, Angela's eyes would fill with tears as she smiled and said, "It's simple. He saved me. He's my hero." She knew people didn't usually call pit bulls heroes because of old stereotypes, but Rocco had shown everyone the truth. Loyalty and love know no breed. And in Baldwinsville, as the snow melted into spring, Angela and Rocco walked together again, side by side, thankful for each other every single day. What had been a night of terror had become a lifetime bond. Her life had been spared by the devotion of a dog who had loved her all along. Angela would carry that story in her heart as long as she lived, a testament to the unbreakable companionship between a woman and her dog. With each step, Rocco made sure she never felt alone again. For Rocco, every spring walk was a reminder of the night he became a hero, his tail wagging with pride.